Hey everybody, we're back on the roof with another video in the Fix Your Mix series. And today we have a submission from FRX and his track You and I. So let's take a listen.
I want you closer, just you and I. Just you and I. Over and over, time after time. Just want you closer, by my side.
Wow, what an interesting track. I've never heard this type of genre before, so I'm really excited to work on it. But it does have some minor issues, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna work on the kick, then bass, then vocal, and from there the rest of the melodic elements, then drums, and finally the sound effects. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so before we talk about the kick, I want to talk about something real quick. When FRX sent me the stems, he mentioned that the track is in 92 BPM. So when I set it up in the project, I noticed something weird, that we have a kick on every 1/8, as you can see right here. And then I realized that he was making a very common mistake, something that I was making for years too, which is not setting the BPM correctly. So this is actually not in 92 BPM, but actually in 184 BPM. So now if we take a look, we can see that the kick is hitting on every beat, so every quarter note. So this would be the correct BPM for this track. And the thing is, it's very easy to get confused because 92 also works since you can double the BPM. So you can have a track in 50 BPM, 100 BPM, 200 BPM, 400 BPM, and so on. But the reason why you want to set it correctly to where you have your kick hitting every beat is to not mess up any BPM synced effects that you might have in your track. So stuff like volume shaper, for example. Like if I were to sidechain the bass to this kick, if I had it set at 92 BPM, instead of a quarter note, I would have to set it to 1/8, which I guess you can argue is just a visual thing, you know, just a matter of comfort and workflow. But I feel like it's just easier to set it to the correct BPM. And it also affects other stuff like LFOs and delays and anything that really syncs to the BPM. And there might be even other reasons as to why you want to set it to the correct BPM. So let me know in the comments if anybody knows something about, oh, you have to set it correctly, otherwise it will affect the points or whatever. You know, if there's any more reasons as to why you want to set it correctly. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. And now here's how the kick sounds like. So yeah, as you can hear and see, it's a very dark kick. It's missing a lot of highs. And if we were to look over here at a spectrum analyzer, we can actually see that it's missing all of those high frequencies. And another thing that we can see is that the pitch curve of this kick is very soft. You can see how it lingers around G1. So it's a very soft kick. We can clearly see it in the waveform. And there's also a bunch of other problems with it, as you can see. So that's why I would just prefer to create a new kick from scratch. So I've already created a kick, and it's a very interesting one because it kind of sounds like a combination between of a psytrance kick and a minimal house, tech house kind of kick. So in order to achieve that, I just took a psytrance kick and I changed its pitch curve in order to make it sound softer. So yeah, you already know the drill. We set the length to 1/8, and then I went here, set this first point all the way up and this point to our root note. And now this track plays a bunch of chords. So we're going to have a bass line that is changing notes. So the bass is going to play F, G sharp, C sharp, and D sharp. So because of that, I thought it would be best to set it to F1, which will be a great middle point. So we can blend all of the different bass notes and align them in phase with the kick. So this is going to make it way easier. And then I've set the second point at F6 at the 1/2048th mark, which gives us a somewhat clicky attack and a somewhat hard punch over here. And then the last point I've set over here at G sharp 2 at the 1/64th mark. And that gives us a much softer body. And before we move to the amp curve, I do have the drive set to 60%, which gives us a little bit of character. And now before we continue with the amp curve, we have to talk about our targets over here in our plugin. And just a reminder, this is a free plugin, which you can get at the link in the description. So you can download it right now and follow along. Okay, so our targets for this kick are going to be -2 dB for the first two bands, and then between 2 to 4 dB in the third band, and +6 dB for the last two bands. And as we can see, our kick is already hitting those targets, and that's also due to our amp curve. So we have the first point set to 45%, then the second point at 100% at the 1/2048th mark, and then the third point at 30% at the 1/512th mark, and then the fourth point also at 30% at the 1/64th mark, and the last point at 0. And as you can see, I have some of those lines curved like so, and that's just to give us a nicer shape to the kick's waveform, as you can see, but also to help us achieve those targets. So for example, if I were to change this over here like so, we can see it in the waveform, but we can also see it here at the plugin. Just look at this band right here. So you can see how it's hitting +5 dB now. So it's not just about making the kick's waveform look pretty, it has a functional goal to it. And of course, since we don't have full control within the amp curve in order to achieve those targets with 100% accuracy, that's why we add an EQ. So if I were to disable this, you can see how we're getting a massive peak over here. And if you remember, our goal is to have a flat line over here. So I just used a Bell EQ in order to balance the spectrum. And now, as you can see, we're getting that flat line. And I also added this one in order to help us flatten it even more to balance those frequencies, but also to hit those targets. So here's how it looks without the EQ. We can see that we're missing a lot of energy over here, and we have way too much energy in the third band. And we can see it even better here at span. You can see the massive peak that we have and the lack of energy over here, the lack of frequencies. And this is how it looks after the EQ. You can see we've balanced the frequencies and we achieved that flat line that I was talking about in the first video. By the way, if you haven't watched the previous videos, you should absolutely watch them in order. That's going to give you the most amount of context and the best learning experience. So there's going to be a link in the description for the playlist, and you can go and watch them in order and then come back and follow along. So yeah, now I'm just going to render our kick into audio so you can see how easy it is and how fast it took me to create this kick, which is why I'm always saying that you don't need to use kick samples. Like, it's way better, way easier, way faster to create your own kicks from scratch and make them fit your track that you're working on. So yeah, we're done with this kick, but this track actually has two kicks in it. So we have this section where the kick we just made is playing in, and then we have this section where we have some sort of a trap kick. And it's an interesting thing because it's not actually a kick. That punch is actually coming from the 808 itself, and this is how it sounds like. So yeah, as you can hear and see in the waveform clearly, we have a pitch modulation right here at the beginning of every 808 bass note. And I get the thinking behind it and the logic, but it's actually a very common mistake. And once again, it's also a mistake that I was making. And the reason why it's a mistake to have a pitch modulation on your 808 bass is because of two reasons. One is that your 808 bass is probably going to change notes. So what it means is that every note is going to have its own pitch modulation, its own pitch down range. So for example, if our 808 bass is playing F, then the pitch down range of the pitch modulation is going to be between F and whatever amount you set it to. So let's say F2 for the sake of this example. So that's the pitch down range. And if you change notes, then you're changing the range. As you can see, you can go higher or lower. So the fact that it's not starting from the same position each time makes it so that every note's pitch down is going to sound different and they're not going to sound cohesive. It's the same thing if I were here in kick 2 making a different kick for each note. So not just changing the end position, but also changing the starting position. So doing something like this where I'm shifting the entire pitch down, up and down, as you can see. So that's problem number one. But the second problem is that you're not pitching a pure sine wave. As you can see right here, this is the waveform which we're modulating its pitch. So we're not getting a pure sine wave pitch down over here. And that's a problem because it just sounds bad. you know, like, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can experiment on your own and see what I'm talking about, because I've tried throughout the years to make kicks with different waveforms. So if you go here in kick 2, you can see that we have a pure sine wave, but we can change it to a saw wave, square wave, triangle, you know, and experiment with all kinds of overtones and stuff like this. And it just doesn't sound good. I think the reason why it doesn't sound good is because if you think about it, you're not just pitching down a sine wave, you're pitching down all these different sine waves on top of it in different octaves. So you're making the pitch down sound more obvious. So we can actually test it out right now. I'm going to start with having a bunch of harmonics, and then I'm going to lower this knob down to a pure sine wave, and you're going to tell me which sounds better. If we were to use just a regular triangle, you'll hear how this also sounds bad. So as you can hear, all of those harmonics are just making the pitch down sound super obvious. And a pure sine wave doesn't have that. It's just one sine wave. So it sounds super clean and super powerful. And there's no reason, even if you don't do extreme stuff like this, obviously. So yeah, that's why we want to make our kicks with pure sine waves. And the same thing goes to the 808 bass over here. So I get the thinking behind it. You want to have your kick and bass in one source so that they obviously work together and there's no problem with phasing and stuff like that, but it's actually the wrong move to do. So because of that, I just went ahead and made a trap kick from scratch. So as you can see right here, as always, we have the length set to 1/8. And even though a lot of people like to argue with me about it, I hope that these videos are enough proof to show you that 1/8 is the perfect length for every kick. It doesn't matter what genre or type it is, the pitch down curve is always going to be set to 1/8. And then we have our first point set to C#7, which is way lower than usual, and that's because trap kicks don't actually have a bunch of high frequencies. So that's why we need to start from lower, and you can actually hear how it sounds in a higher position if I were to change this right here, as opposed to what we have right here at C#7. So yeah, and then we have our root note set over here, and instead of 2 middle points, we only have 1, and that's because the pitch curve of a trap kick is super soft. As you can see right here, we have it set to A#2 at the 1/1024th mark, and that results in a super soft body, as we tend to have with these types of kicks. And of course, you can experiment with whatever you think sounds good to you. You know, you can move it a little bit earlier, a little bit later, higher, lower, and that's going to result in a different tone. And before we move to the amp curve, we have distortion over here as set to wave type with 24% distortion and 50% mix, and we have the drive set to 60%. And now we have an interesting thing going on in the amp curve. We have the first point set all the way up to 100%, and then the second point also at 100% at the 1/128th mark, and 0% at the end. But what we're doing is actually choking down the kick to a 1/16th length. So the overall length of the kick of the pitch down is set to 1/8, but the amp curve, the true length, is set to 1/16th. And that's not a contradiction. I've always mentioned the exception of trap kicks having a 1/16th length, and that's because of the super fast and super soft pitch curve, as you can see right here. So it reaches those lower frequencies way earlier than any other kick. And that's why we don't need all of these frequencies to linger past the 1/16th mark, because that's where our kick transitions into bass. So that's why we choke it all the way down to 1/16th. And you're probably wondering about the targets that we have for this kick. So the targets are going to be +6 dB for the first band, and then 0 dB for the second, third, and fourth bands. And the fifth and last band actually doesn't matter because we don't have much frequencies up there. So this band doesn't matter. So you just want to keep it below 0 dB. As you can see, we're hitting -4 dB over here. And we're not hitting those targets with the amp curve this time because there's not much room for us to actually influence the individual specific frequencies. But that's okay because we don't have to. We can use an EQ as I did right here. So you can see I have a bell curve right here that is scooping up 10 dB, and that allows us to hit those targets over here. So here's how it sounds without the EQ. As you can see, we have a lot of energy at the second band and also in the third band. And this is how it sounds with the EQ. But we're not done yet with this kick because currently it sounds super weak and quiet, and that's because we need to boost the volume over here. So we're gonna go from 12 dB to 0 dB. So it's a 12 dB boost, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 12 dB. It can be 8, 10, 9, 11, whatever it is that sounds good to you. But here's how it's gonna sound now. So you can hear how it's knocking way harder now, and it sounds more like a trap kick, and that's because we boosted its volume to where it was clipping over here on the master. So on the master we have this clipper right here, which we're driving our kick into, and that's what makes it knock super hard like that. So yeah, you can hear that without it, it doesn't knock so much. And of course, where you set the threshold is going to impact how much you're going to have to boost the kick over here in volume. So keep that in mind. So the reason why we're driving the kick super loud in order to clip in the clipper on the master instead of having a clipper on the kick directly is because from my experience, it just doesn't sound good. Because in the mastering stage, you're going to clip it either way. So from my experience, having a clipped sound, getting clipped again in the mastering just doesn't sound good. It's like wearing a hat on a hat. It's just too much processing. So that's why I prefer to do it like so. So we have one clipper doing all the hard work and it gets us a better sounding sound. And we're going to do one last comparison. I'm going to take this EQ off. I'm going to show you how it sounds with and without. So yeah, that's our trap kick. Okay, so here's how the bass sounds. And this bass has two problems. The first one is, as you can see in the waveform, it is heavily sidechained to the point where it only plays on the offbeat. And as I said in the two previous videos, this is not necessarily a problem. This could absolutely be a desired effect, but I feel like it would be better to actually have the bass play over here so we can blend it with the kick and have them sound as one cohesive sound, even if the goal is to create that motion of an offbeat bass. And I feel like this is especially important for high tempo tracks like this. Since it plays at such a high BPM, I feel like you want the bass to play as much as possible, you know, because this is like a very small amount of time for the bass to register. So that's problem number one. And the second problem is, well, actually, let's see if you can figure it out. I'm gonna play the bass while it plays here in the oscilloscope, and you let me know if you see a problem. So yeah, if you notice right here, the bass was shifting as it was playing, which means that the bass was changing its phase starting position every time a note was being played. And that's probably because he didn't set the random phase all the way down in the synthesizer so that every bass note starts from the same phase position. And of course that's an issue because if you want to align the kick and bass in phase, that would be impossible if the bass keeps shifting its phase. And even if there's a complete separation between the kick and the bass, meaning that they're not playing together as we have over here, even in a case like that, I feel like it would be best to eliminate that random phase and have it start from the same phase position, just to be on the safe side and make it more consistent. And another small thing, which is not necessarily an issue, it's not a right or wrong thing. As we can see right here, the bass is missing the second harmonic, which makes it a square wave type of bass. And as I said, it's not necessarily wrong, but I feel like for this track, it would be better if it had a saw wave type bass, which means that it has all of the three first harmonics, which will give this track a much warmer tone. So some tracks would be better with a square wave type bass, which sounds colder, and some would be best with a saw wave type bass, which sounds warmer. Okay, so because of that, I decided to make a bass from scratch, and this time we're not going to use the two EQs and VU meter setup because I've already have those three first harmonic balanced inside the synthesizer itself, as you can see right here. So these are perfectly balanced according to my bass chart, and if you haven't downloaded my bass chart yet, you can do so right now. The link would be in the description. It's absolutely free, so you can get it right now and follow along. Yeah, so the reason why I decided to do it this way is because I wanted to make my life and your life way easier. So what I did was to create a free Serum 2 preset pack with 28 bass notes, and it's divided into two. So you have a saw wave type basses and square wave type basses. It's the same bass sound, the same three harmonics or two harmonics in the case of the square wave type basses, but each type have all all of the 14 bass notes, so F, F sharp, G, etc. And all of them are already balanced. And not only that, as we can see right here, I created two macros. The first one is the pitch modulation tip that I shared in the first video, where we're pitching down the first 1/8 of the bass to the normal pitch in order to help us align the bass in phase with the kick. So as you can see right here, and I believe this is set on the maximum setting to 7 semitones, so it's a pretty extreme pitch down. But of course, you don't have to set it all the way up. You can set it wherever you want, you know, just to get a little bit of it, or all the way as I have it right here in this track, because in this case, having a higher pitch down range will help us to align the kick and bass in phase more easily, since the kick is more boomy. It takes the sound wave longer to pitch down into those frequencies. So with boomier kicks, you would want to set it more high up, and with softer kicks, you would want to set it just a little bit like so. And what I also have is a polarity flip. So this is a binary macro, so it's either 0 or 100, and it just flips the polarity, which helps us align it better in phase in some cases. So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I disable the polarity flip right here on this bass, you can see that even when our kick and bass are aligned perfectly in phase, it still looks like they're clashing a little bit, and that's because of the direction of the waveform of the bass. As you can see, those steps right here. So the polarity flip just takes this waveform and inverts the phase. So now if we look at it, watch how it's going to flip. You see now how it's going in this direction? So this is how the kick and bass was before the polarity flip, and this is how it will look now after the polarity flip. So you can see we're getting a much smoother motion and blending between the two. And you can see it even better when I have this EQ enabled. So I'm cutting everything above C2, and this is how it looks with the polarity flip, and this is how it's going to look without the polarity flip. So you can see how the bass waveform and the kicks waveform, it kind of looks like they're butting heads instead of going in the same direction. So yeah, that's just an important thing to keep in mind every time you're trying to align the kick and bass in phase. So yeah, I've done this for every preset in the Serum 2 preset pack, and you can get it for absolutely free. The link would be in the description down below. So yeah, you can download it right now and come back to the video, of course, you know, don't leave me hanging over here. And then what I did was to just add a little bit of stereo information, as I showed in the first video in the series. So we're adding a little bit of stereo information to the bass, and that's it. And of course, I aligned this already in phase with the kick, and I also have a sidechain right here, as you can see the parameters. So let's do a little comparison between our kick and bass and the original kick and bass. Yeah, and of course, I forgot to mention that I already leveled this bass within the mix. So yeah, as you can see, it's hitting the -4 dB target in the first band. And of course, that the next thing would be to do the same thing for every bass note. So you see how I have each bass note in its own channel. I'm gonna repeat the process and balance and level everything. But this is not over yet, because we do have the 808 bass in the second drop. And if you remember, we discussed how this 808 bass has a problem with the issue of having the pitch modulation at the beginning, but that's actually easily fixable, as I did right here. As you can see, I just faded out the beginning, and I also faded a little bit at the end. And this is something that also was an issue with the other bass. There isn't this linear fade between each bass note, which makes the bass feel a little bit monotone. So it's always best to just give it a little bit of fade between notes. So as you can see, there's a bunch of manual work over here where I cut each note into its own channel and did the fades. And now what we need to do is balance them with our 2EQ and VU meter setup. So that's what we're going to do right now. And we're going to start by measuring the fundamental. So you can see that it's sitting at 3.9 dB. So I'm just going to adjust this gain knob and set it to -3.9 dB, so that we'll get a reading of 0 over here, which will make it easier for us to measure the other two harmonics. We're getting 0 right there, as you can see. So now the second harmonic. So as you can see, we're getting a reading of -13.9, which is super low. But that's because this 808 bass and 808s in general are more of a square wave type bass. So actually, I don't think we need to do anything with the second harmonic, because in a square wave type bass, the second harmonic is just not really important and usually is set really low. So I'm just going to move on to the third harmonic. And as you can see, we're getting also a very low reading of -16.2. And according to my chart, it needs needs to sit at minus 6.5 dB. So I'm going to compensate with this EQ right here. So as you can see, I have it set to plus 11 dB, which is a lot, by the way. And I'll probably talk about this later in a little bit, but first let's measure it and see that we're actually hitting the target. And yeah, as you can see, we're hitting the minus 6.5 dB target. So now if we look over here in the spectrum, we can see how the second harmonic is pretty low. And then we have the third harmonic, which is balanced with our fundamental. And the rest of the harmonics are in a good level, more or less. So this is how it sounds with and without the EQ. And the problem that I was talking about earlier is since we have such a huge boost over here, and since those fades on the clip are coming before the EQ, are going to mean that chances are we're going to get a boost over here where the fades are. And as you can see, I bounced this into audio, and you can see that we're getting a little bit, in this case, it's not a lot of boost over here, but sometimes it can really ruin the work of the fades. I feel like it would be more obvious if we actually boosted the fundamental. So I just want to show you what I'm talking about. So I created this boost on the fundamental and watch how the waveform is going to look now. As you can see right here, we didn't get much at the beginning, but here it created some sort of a feedback later. Just look at this. It totally undid what the fade was doing. So this is insane. Look at that tail that we got afterwards. So just something to keep in mind whenever you have something that is modulating the volume and then afterwards you're adding something like an EQ or a distortion, because that's going to undo what the volume modulation was doing. So yeah, in this case, it was very minor. So yeah, now I'm just going to level it. As you can see, we're hitting the minus 4 dB over here. So now it's perfectly leveled and we can play it with our kick. So this is how they sound together. Yeah, and earlier I was actually experimenting and I thought I might add some additional stereo information, but this time I'm going to do it in a slightly different way. As you can see, we have one dry channel and then we have a second channel, a duplicate, where we have a multiband distortion. And as you can see, I'm distorting everything above 98 Hertz. So this one has nothing at all. And not only that, not only that there's no distortion here, I have this, as you can see, set to broken tube all the way up. I have this band soloed, as you can see. So we're going to hear only this band. And after that, I have the delay trick. As you can see, it creates a difference between the right and left channel and delays the left channel by 5 milliseconds. And I still haven't decided yet whether I'm going to roll off the highs or not. I feel like I need to hear the rest of the elements within the track in order to make that decision. So for now, I'm just going to disable it, and this is how it sounds. So as you can hear, not only it adds stereo information, but it also makes our bass sounds a little bit more aggressive, and you can make it sound less aggressive with the high cut, but I still haven't decided whether I want to do that or not. But it also adds a bunch of harmonics and filling out the spectrum and making our 808 bass sound fuller and more powerful. And now all I need to do is repeat the same process with all of these different bass notes. And yeah, even though it might seem like a lot of work, it's actually not that bad. Like, you can do that in 10 minutes. Like, it's really not all that. But I feel like all that work is actually worth it. Because at the end of the day, you're gonna get a consistent, a cohesive, full, powerful sounding low end. So in my opinion, it's totally worth it. Okay, so here's the vocal.
I want you closer, just you and I.
And we're working on the vocal since it's the main melodic element in this track. There's no other sound in this track that is taking the lead. So it's extra important that we get it right. And as you just heard, it's a bit too bright. So what I did was to just lower the highs by 4 dB. And also I have enabled the dynamic EQ function, which is lowering it by extra 4 dB as it reacts to the incoming audio. So essentially it's also acting as a de-esser, taming all of those harsh frequencies and syllables, since this is a very breathy vocal. And I also have a high cut right here, as you can see. I'm not really using it to get rid of those higher frequencies, but more as a way to shave off those higher frequencies. So if we take a look over here at the spectrum, you can see that we still have high frequencies over here. So we're not getting rid of them, we're just shaving them off, giving a much smoother, more natural sounding highs. And if I solo this, you can hear what we're getting rid of or just shaving off. So yeah, even though it might seem like an extreme move, it's actually not. But you know, if you don't want to use a high cut, you can probably use a high shelf instead and do something like this. And this is how it sounds with and without the EQ.
I want you closer. I want you closer.
So yeah, that's all I did to it. And other than that, like, it sounds pretty good. You know, it's well balanced. The only thing that I noticed was that the vocals in the break were quieter by 2 dB than the vocals in the drop over here. So I boosted them by 2 dB. And while I understand the thinking behind it, I just don't think it's necessary in this case, trying to make the vocals in the drop sound louder than the vocals in the break, creating that contrast between the break and the drop. So that's actually pretty clever. So it's not like he did something wrong. I just felt like in this case it wasn't really necessary. But it's a good thing of him to think about, you know, like paying attention to those little details. And this guy's been making music for only a year now, which is insane. Him and also Lucid Bloom in the previous video, you know, they both have been making music for only a year now. And the fact that they're paying attention to all those little details is crazy to me, you know, like I don't think I was paying attention like that in my first year, you know what I mean? So yeah, kudos to these guys. I don't know what they're feeding young producers these days, but it's really incredible to watch and see. But anyway, going back to this vocal right here, I decided to add some stereo information to it. And the way I did it is by having a chorus on it, as you can see, mix all the way up. So that creates a difference between the left and right channel, creating that stereo information for us. And then afterwards, I decided to put a distortion on it just to squish it a little bit and maybe add a little bit more harmonics to the sound, make it sound fuller. But since the distortion introduces some high frequencies, I went ahead and added an EQ right here, as you can see, cutting everything above 4500 Hertz. And then what I did was to add a utility right here, making it 100% side information, eliminating all of the mid information. So we're making sure that this layer stays 100% in stereo so that it doesn't interfere with our mono signal. And usually that's not really necessary, but I wanted to take that extra precaution since FRX told me that one of the things that he didn't like about his version was the lack of clarity in the vocals. And I don't think it necessarily comes from the vocals being not balanced, but I feel like it's more the fact that all of the elements besides the vocals are overpowering and overshadowing the vocal, not giving it much space and respect. And also, if you can see right here in the stems that he sent me, all of these are just vocal layers, different effects and stuff like that. So he has all of these layers, all of these different effects that were taken away from the main vocal. So that's why I always have this advice that I was given by my teacher in music production school, where he taught us that less is more and to always keep it simple. And if we want to make an element sound big, we need to do as less as possible in order for it to sound huge. So I always have that echoing in my mind that less is more. Don't try to overcomplicate stuff. And I'm not saying that there's no room for complexity. There is. You can totally add, you know, whatever you want to this, like flangers and phasers, and do like all kinds of harmonies and stuff like that. But I feel that, you know, sometimes it's just not necessary, you know, not every time you need to do that. And this is how it sounds.
I want you closer. Just you and I.
So as you can see, we're just adding stereo information, making it sound wider while not messing with the mono signal at all. And other than that, I decided to keep this delay layer that he had for the vocal. And I have an EQ on it, just taking the highs away from the sound so that we're clearing space for the main vocal. And also I have a sidechain compressor on it, just ducking the delay while the main vocal is playing. So that way we're creating even more extra space for it. And I have both of them going into the reverb channel that I have over here, and you can see the reverb settings right here. And I also have a sidechain compressor that is sidechaining the reverb to duck while the vocal is playing. So once again, we're carving space for the vocal, and this is how it sounds now.
I want you closer, just you and I.
And when the vocal is playing on the drop, I have a sidechain, just sidechaining a little bit to give the kick a little bit of space. And then what I did afterwards is just to level it within the mix. And I just repeated the same process as I showed in previous videos. I played it until one of these bands showed 0. And then from there, I leveled within the mix. And this is how it sounds with the kick and bass.
Over and over, time after time.
So yeah, that's it for the vocal. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what I did with the rest of the melodic elements within the track, both in the drop and in the break. So we have this vocal element right here in the drop. And I thought it was too bright, so I did the usual EQ move, lowered this by 6 dB, and then did the same high cut that I did with the main vocal. And then of course I leveled it within the mix, and this is how it sounds. And then I went over here into the leads, and I started with this one, and this is how it sounds. And as you can hear and see, it has that blip in the beginning of the note. And this is probably because he had the decay and sustain in the synthesizer down, so it had that initial attack and pluckiness to the sound. Or maybe he just added a compressor which caused the same effect. And maybe that was intentional, but I feel like personally, like it just doesn't work well. You know, it's not really the role of this sound. The sound's supposed to be like a pad, like an ambient layer on top of the drop, and having that pluck in the beginning just feels a little bit weird and jarring. So yeah, you can feel how it kind of steals your attention for a second at the beginning. I feel like it would be better if he had that on every chord change. So having like an attack over here as well. If I were to just boost the volume over here, then just do something like this. So now if we listen to it, so now, as you can see, it has actually a function, and it serves as like an indicator that is putting an emphasis every time we change a chord. So you can either do that, or you can just get rid of it very easily. I'm just gonna delete this and grab this section right here and paste it over here, just like so. So now we don't have that sudden attack at the beginning. And another thing that I did to it, you know, this might be just a personal preference, but I feel like a lot of people underestimate the power of detuning, and they're either scared of it, you know, because it could definitely sound bad if you're overdoing it. But I feel like striking the perfect amount of detunement makes sounds sound way cooler and way more epic, which I feel like this layer was supposed to add like an element of epicness and energy, but currently it just sounds a bit too dull because it's not detuned enough. So it sounds a little bit boring. So what I did was to add just a shifter, and what this does, it automates the pitch very fast. And as you can see, we have the amount over here. So now if I play this, I'm going to show you with and without. And of course, this would be better if you were to do that inside the synthesizer directly. Currently, it sounds a little bit weird, you know. But that's just because of this effect. So it actually would be better to do it with inside the synthesizer. But I feel like it gives it that a little bit of an edge to it. And even with it, I still felt, to be honest, that it was a little bit dull. So what I did was to just add this transgate effect. And I believe this is a free plugin that you can get. And it creates that classic trance stutter, that classic transgate pattern. And what it does, it just modulates the volume. As you can see, it just follows this pattern. And I have the mix set to 80%, so making it a bit more subtle. And this is how it sounds now. But yeah, even though I feel like this decision is crossing over into production territory, so I always have this dilemma when I'm working on these tracks, because this is not my track, and I don't know if I'm crossing the line and doing something that the original artist wouldn't want me to do. So I don't know. I hope FRX likes this, and I hope you guys like it too. So let me know in the comments below if you think that this is a good addition or not. So yeah, and by the way, I applied this to all of these different leads layer in the drop, and I also have a sidechain going on, as you can see right here. These are the settings. And then after that, we have this vocal layer, which is another similar one. It's just a pad drone that's supposed to give the drop some more energy. And as you can see, I didn't do anything to it. I just leveled it within the mix. So this is how it sounds now within the drop. Yeah, and then we have this ARP layer. And this chords layer, which I thought was also lacking a bit in detunement, and this would be better to actually fix within the synthesizer, maybe adding more voices and detunement. So you can see that I gave it just a little bit of detunement right here, and this is how it sounds. And I also didn't do anything to it besides that. If you remember, I've talked about it, I believe, in the first video in this series, that you have way more leeway with these kinds of layers that are not the main element. So it doesn't really matter if you get it right, you know, and if you EQ it perfectly and compress it perfectly or whatever. Like, it really doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter how you level it within the mix, if it's a bit too loud or too quiet. Like, nobody cares, you know what I mean? So this is how they all sound now.
Just want you closer, be on my side.
And over here we have more layers. And as you can hear, I kept the trans gate. But yeah, as I said, it doesn't really matter. You can do whatever you want to these layers. And I feel like I don't need to show you every single layer because it's just the same thing over and over. But let me know if you do want to watch it. If it's important for you, then I'll do it. But I feel like you're getting the gist of it because there's more layers right here, like this vocal chant, this cell phone vocal, and this starter vocal effect over here. And I really didn't do much to them. So this is how the second drop sounds now. So yeah, we're done with those, but now we have a couple more of layers that are mostly playing in the break. And here what I did was to just add this strings layer that I've showed you in the previous video. I feel like this is such an easy trick to fill up the spectrum and also create a little bit of tension. And this is something that I do in every track, literally in every track. And this is how it sounds. And now we have these 3 chord layers, and as you can see, I grouped them and I put an EQ on them just to filter them in the beginning and give it a little bit of movement as it's opening up towards the drop. And first, let's start with this piano right here. And it's a really good piano sound. The only thing that I did was to just compress it a little bit more so we can sustain it a little bit longer in these sections. So as you can see, we're compressing a lot. We're compressing by 10 dB, which is insane, but I feel like it works. You know, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. And if I were to bounce this into audio, you'll probably see better how it looks after the compressor. So you'll get a better understanding of what actually we're doing. So here's how it looks. You can see how we're getting way more sustain. So you can see it plays longer than the initial piano. And then a good thing that he did was to not rely on this piano layer and add another layer to it, since even with the compressor that we've applied to the piano, it still doesn't sustain all the way. So it creates all of these open spaces in between chords. So in order to fill that gap, he used another layer which sounds like this, which helps us fill in those gaps. And I didn't do anything to it, I just leveled it within the mix. And the third layer that he had sounded initially like this, which is very similar to this layer. So I didn't want to have 2 similar sounding layers. And initially what I did was to just remove the lows from this one. As you can see right here, we're just taking away all of those lower frequencies to make space for the piano in this layer. But I felt like that wasn't enough. So I ended up not using the EQ and doing this instead. What I did was to pitch this layer by 1 octave. So it plays an octave higher and fills in the spectrum a little bit better. And this is how it sounds now. I feel like it also adds a little bit of texture to it, the way we're using the warp mode. You know, so sometimes that could be a desirable effect. This is something that they use a lot in like lo-fi type of music. But as you can see, we don't need the EQ anymore because it's not playing at that lower octave, so it's not playing the same notes that these 2 layers are already playing. And this is how they all sound together. And oh, I almost forgot, we do have these mid-bass layers, and this is how they sound. I just decided not to use them because, as you can see and hear, the sidechain is just too extreme, and also when I tried to balance them with an EQ, I had to lower the highs a lot, but also boost this area right here. So I thought it would just be easier to replicate the same type of mid-bass from scratch, since basically this is just a super saw. So here's what I did. I just used a saw wave, and I went inside the wavetable editor, and I just removed the first 3 harmonics so that it doesn't clash with our our sub bass, and I gave it 16 voices with a little bit of detunement, as you can see. And I also added this layer, the Monster 2 wavetable, and I chose this wavetable position, which I thought sounded similar to the mid bass layer over here. And that's it. They're playing the same notes, and this time I'm applying my own sidechain right here, as you can see. So it's way less aggressive, and I feel like this is especially important, as I was saying earlier, because of the higher tempo, the higher BPM. You don't want to overdo the sidechain in a high BPM track because it's just not going to sound good, because you're not going to have the same space that you would have with the same sidechain curve in like 120 BPM, for example. So even though something like this would probably work at like 128 BPM, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would work as well and translate the same in 170 BPM or 180 BPM. So it's important to keep that in mind. And yeah, in this section right here, I just duplicated the same bass and I gave the wavetables their first 3 harmonics back, since the sub bass is not playing in this section, as you can see with this oscillator as well. And all I did EQ wise was just to remove by 2 dB this frequency area right here in the 3000 Hertz range. So it's just a subtle move to remove those harsh frequencies and create a little bit of space for the other elements within the track. And this is how it sounds within the context of the mix. So yeah, and in this section, if we were to listen to the original version, there's a tape stop effect. So I just added this effect right here on the master, which has a tape stop effect, as you can see right here. And I'm automating the on and off, so it just works in this section right here and doesn't mess with the rest of the track. And this is how it sounds. So yeah, just replicating that effect as well. Okay, so just real quick, I added this auto pan trick that I was talking about in the previous video because I thought that the reverb could use a little bit more movement. And here's the settings, as you can see. So we're just modulating the pan a little bit. Okay, and now let's work on the drums. So first we have this open hi-hat. And as you can see in here, it's a little bit long. So all I did was to just shorten it like so, as you can see. So now it's way more punchy. And that goes back to my point, to what I was talking about with the higher tempos. Since this BPM is really high, it means that we don't have much space. So if in lower BPMs we can allow our drums to ring out more and take more space, in higher BPMs we need to make them as short and punchy as possible. So yeah, other than that, I didn't do anything to it. I just leveled it within the mix. And then I moved on to this snare. And it already sounded perfect, so I didn't do anything to it, but I did add a little bit of sidechain, as you can see right here. So we're removing a little bit of the attack, and that's just to help us make some space for the kicks transient so that they don't clash. And then we have this hi-hat right here. And as you can see, I didn't do anything to it as well. I just added the same sidechain that I added to the snare, and hear how they all sound within the context of the mix. So yeah, now in the second drop, we have all of the drums in this section, and we have this main snare right here. And I did have to mess with it a little bit, so here's what I did. I added an EQ, and as you can see, I just boosted the fundamental because I felt like it wasn't pronounced enough. And it's really the most important frequency in any like punchy percussion sound, so snares and toms and stuff like that. And as you can see, there's a weird thing where the true fundamental of this is G sharp, but you can see that we also have another frequency right here at C4. And unfortunately, there's just a bunch of bad samples like this with weird artifacts like that. So I guess we can just lower it a little bit, like so, maybe even lower it a little bit more. So yeah, now as you can see, we only have our G sharp 3 fundamental. And you know, some people have been asking me about snares, and you know, they want me to make videos about how to create snares from scratch. And that's actually a real frustration, maybe even more than kicks, because I feel like with kicks, there are somewhat decent samples out there. there from various companies. But snares, it's really like, I don't remember when was the last time that I encountered like a really good snare sample. I feel like kicks are more understood by producers, but snares is just something that not a lot of people really understand. Like what really makes for a good snare. And yeah, I'm absolutely planning on talking about snares in the future and making a bunch of videos on how to create snares from scratch for all various genres, you know, from dubstep snare to trance snares to house, 808, you know, whatever. But unfortunately, that's just gonna take a little bit of time for me to make those videos. But yeah, it's a real struggle. So yeah, that's what I did to it. Also took a little bit of those frequencies right here, and this is how it sounds with and without. Then what I did was to automate the high cut that I have over here, because I thought that those higher frequencies that are lingering throughout the sound are not really necessary. So I just automated it going from here to here, as you can see, like so. And this is how it sounds now. Just taking a little bit of those highs as it progresses. And then in order to solidify everything, what I did was to just clip the sound pretty heavily. So if we were to look at the waveform before the clipping, we can see the shape of it. We can see that it's pretty uneven. We have a boost right here. So here's how it looks with the clipping. And as you can see right here, we're getting this very balanced and clipped sound. And now it's not mandatory, like you don't need to do that with every snare, but in these types of snare and like trap snare and stuff like that, I feel like it works with the aggressive nature of the sound and it makes it more balanced and powerful. And here's how it sounds with and without. And if we were to look right here at the plugin, you can see that I'm leveling it at plus 2 dB in this band right here. This is the frequency area where the snare's fundamental is at. So obviously it's going to be the loudest one. And even though it goes above the 0 dB line, which usually, if you remember when I talked about it, I only want the kick to go over 0 and be the loudest element within the track. But since the snare is so important to this part, to this section of the drop, then it's okay for it to go above the 0 dB line. So yeah, it's always dependent on the role of the individual sound that you're working on. Oh, and by the way, there are some snares that are hitting with the kick. So as you can see with this one, so all I did was to just fade in a little bit, so it's not fighting with the kick for space. And now we have this open hat sound. And as you can see, I'm fading out the beginning also to not interfere with the kick. And what you can also see within the waveform, you can see how it's leaning towards one side, which means there's an imbalance between the left and right channels. And that's not necessarily a problem. Sometimes producers like to hard pan left or right, so it can totally be an artistic decision, but I felt like it wasn't necessary for this sound. So what I did is just to correct it. As you can see, I'm using a utility over here and I'm panning it to the left to restore that balance. As you can see in the meter right here, it's more or less balanced between the left and right channel now, but we lost a lot of volume in the side signal. So what I did was to just split the sound into side and mid signals and then just boosted the side signal by 14 dB in order to compensate for it. And this is how it sounds now. So yeah, it sounds and looks more balanced now. And then we have this hi-hat pattern right here, and I'm just sidechaining it to a ghost kick. So I just took the trap kick that we made and put it over here in this channel. As you can see, I made it way shorter. And this channel is not really making any sound. As you can see, it's set to sends only. So it just acts as a trigger to the sidechain. And if we were to look right here, you can see how the kick is now triggering the sidechain. So every time the kick plays, it ducks in volume. And I did that because it's way easier to do it this way instead of going in manually and fading all of those individual hits. And then we have a filler snare right here. And as you can see, I shorten it, and I also have the same EQ trick, taking a little bit of the highs as it plays. So this is with and without. And there's another filler snare right here. I just faded out the hits that were clashing with the kick, as you can see here, and then leveled it within the mix. And the last thing that we have here is this hardstyle kick that comes in the second section of the second drop. And as you can see, I faded the beginning of it in order for it to not clash with the kick. And another thing that I did, just to be on the safe side, is to cut everything below A3. And as you can see, it was already well filtered, but just to be on the safe side. And this is how it all sounds now. So yeah, that's it. As you can see, we're not doing a whole lot to the sounds. It's really about making sure that every sound is playing its role within the mix. And it doesn't matter if you get it 100% perfect, because most of these sounds are not the main sounds, they're just supporting elements. So really, like, the most important sound within the drums is this snare right here. And as you can see, it's the sound that we did the most to, because it was really important to get it right. But with the other sounds, you have way more leeway. So it really doesn't matter if you nail the leveling or the balancing or whatever it is. So don't stress about it too much. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the sound effects that we have here. We don't have a whole lot, and I want to start with this rain sound effect. And the only thing that I did to it was to just filter and cut everything above 3000 hertz. And that's something that I do with a lot of Foley sounds, because sounds that are filtered this way, that are darker, also sound like they're way more in the back, which is exactly the point of these kinds of sound. They're not supposed to be in the foreground, they're supposed to be in the background. So by doing that, I'm sending them even more into the background. And those higher frequencies, while in some cases it can work, you can leave them on, and that can create like a vinyl scratch noise type of effect if that's your goal. So here's how it sounds without the high cut. So yeah, I just feel like it sounds better this way. And if I were to play it with the context of the mix, this is how it would sound like. And you know what? I'm just gonna exaggerate it for the sake of this example. So I'm gonna boost the volume, and then you tell me which one is better, with or without the high cut.
I want you closer. I want you closer.
So yeah, let me know in the comments which version do you think is better. And other than that, we have some kind of weird sound effects and Foley. And here we have this downlifter sound, which I'm just sidechaining, as you can see right here. And yeah, I didn't do a whole lot. I just leveled these sounds.
Just want you closer. Here by my side.
So yeah, as you can see, they're very subtle and they're not stealing any attention. They're just there in the background, barely noticeable, just supporting the entire musical idea. Okay, now we're at the mastering stage, and you can see the waveform of our exported mix. You can see how well balanced it looks. And this part is to be expected, of course, since this is the trap kick that we made. And if you remember, we boosted it by 12 dB. So that's why we have all of those spikes over here, because that's our trap kick that is going to be clipped when it gets to the clipper. So that's totally not a problem. And once again, I feel like there's no reason to go over each settings of each plugin, because they're exactly the same from the first video in this series. So you can go back to the first video and watch if you want to see all of the settings. And over here in the limiter, you can see that I have it set to 5 dB, exactly like in the previous video. I felt like that was a good spot for it, where we get enough loudness. And of course, as always, you can feel free to experiment if you want it louder, quieter, you know, whatever it is. You totally have that control. So just reminding you guys as usual. And now, before we take a listen to the final result, let's do a little comparison. Okay, so this is the original mix, and this is our new mix right here. And you can see how in our mix, we can make out the first 3 harmonics of the bass. And then the original one, they're missing. So that's the first difference. The other difference that I'm noticing is you can see how soft the original kick is. We can see that we have a buildup right here at 47 hertz. And you can see how our kick is way more punchy because it's peaking at around 60 hertz. So it's way less soft. And other than that, they're pretty similar, as you can see, the two curves. But I would say that in our version, there's a slight boost on the lows. So the low end is a bit louder than the original version. And now this is representing the second drop with the trap kick. We can see that it overall looks the same, but I think that the only noticeable difference is you can see how in our version, the harmonics of the bass are way closer together. So there's not a huge difference between the fundamental and the rest of the harmonics. And in the original version, you can clearly see that the fundamental is way louder than the other harmonics. So that just shows how unbalanced that 808 bass is and how dominant its fundamental is. Other than that, there's not much difference. You can see how similar the two curves are. And if we compare the loudness, we can see that we're hitting around -5 LUFS, which, as I said before, is the standard for loudness. So you always want to be around -5, which extends to -6, -4, and we can see that we're totally achieving that objective standard and without any unwanted distortion. And we can see that the original version is much quieter. It's hitting around -8 LUFS, and I think that it's because of the lack of balance within the harmonics of the bass, or the first 3 harmonics. Because if you remember, when we looked at the spectrum, they were not existent, so having the second and third harmonic will help tremendously to make this track louder and hit the -5 LUFS target. And we can see that in the second drop, we're still around the -5 LUFS target in our version, and the original version is still around -8 LUFS, so there's no difference. So yeah, that's it. And now all is left to do is just listen to the results. And now here's the final result.
I want you closer, just you and I want you closer, just you and I, just you and I, over and over, time after time. Just want you closer, here by my side.
Yeah, so I'm happy with the results, but you already know that my opinion doesn't matter here. So here's what FRX had to say about it. So as you can see, he loved it. So what do you guys say? Did we fix this mix? Let me know what you think in the comments below. It was a lot of fun working on this track, so thank you to FRX for sending it. And if you want to submit yours, just check the description to learn how to do so. But yeah, I also want to thank everyone who made it this far into the video. There's gonna be more exciting things coming up, so keep an eye out for that. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!